Oh, the little piece I read this morning as part of the memorial was actually not originally a part of the talk, but it actually fit exactly into where I wanted to begin. In any case. So, Dongshan says, if he didn't know reality, how could he have known such a way to speak? If he knew reality, why did he go to the trouble of speaking? And that kind of epitomizes the essence of most of the exchanges in this whole tradition of anecdote exchanges. There's always the duality, the not two and the not one. So Bob started us with the not two, the not one. This was not two, but not one. So this is the last week or 2 weeks ago, I started with the story of the man hanging by his teeth on a branch with nothing to hold on to and no place to put his feet. And he's asked the question, why did Bodhidharma come from the west? And if you answer, you die. If you don't answer, you live in ignorance. So that's kind of the conundrum that comes out and plays a part. I'm going to suggest as we talk more about ritual and practice, is what the practice is about. It's a reinstantiation of that basic duality and not one, again and again and again. Two other things that the practice instantiates. The original, this is particularly for the Zen sect or the Chan sect, is the original enlightenment. You're not getting anything. What did Bodhidharma get in the West? Nothing. He didn't have to, he already had it. That theme comes through. We'll see one other as we go along. So I have a story about my wife. I always tell a story about my wife. It's good because she's never there when I tell it. When she first came to the stage, she adamantly maintained she's not a Buddhist. Whenever anyone asks her, you would no, I'm not a Buddhist. But one of the things I noticed immediately that stood out when we were making our drive up to the mountains where we used to have a place to live, and we'd travel on not 154, what's the one that goes over to the Central Valley from
120.
120. There's a James Dean. Anybody know James Dean? You know James Dean?
Oh, yeah. The 46, that's where he had that accent.
We passed that place and I said, Yoko, see that bit of chrome? It's just a chrome 90 degree angle around a tree, which turns out to not to be the tree that crashed. But it's right next to the restaurant. So it's convenient to stop. And I only stopped there once or twice. But I told that to you, go there, see that, notice that over there, that's James Dean's memorial. So as we went by, she didn't know who James Dean was. She hadn't seen the movie. She knew it must be important because he has a chrome thing put around the tree, and I explained the story to her. I said, why did you do that? I said, why not? She does it for all kinds of things now, I discovered, not just James Dean. It's kind of an ingrained. And she's not a Buddhist. She's more Buddhist than I am. So decoding the not two, not one, using the Heart Sutra, we're going to discuss, if we have time, and I may not get through it all, but we're gonna discuss the Heart Sutra and the Precious Mirror Samadhi. Those are the two main texts that we're gonna look at today, or eventually. But using the Heart Sutra to decode what I read earlier in the memorial, and what we will read later. In fact, let's read it now. Bob and I are going to do what took place in Soto, well, not Soto, they were Buddhist monasteries that happened to have an abbot who would, if the abbot was a Soto abbot, then they would perform a particular kind of ritual, which would be this exchange between a monk and the master in the hall. So Bob is going to be the innocent monk.
Well, I know.
He already is. You already preached the Dharma this morning, so you knew more than I do. But anyway, you'll see it comes out in
Well, most people know more than you do. You forgot more than most people already know.
I've heard that before. Not comforting. Okay, so it starts with a monk.
The monk asked the national
Don't read
teacher,
that part.
"Oh, what sort of thing is the mind of the ancient Buddhas?"
Wall, tile, and rubble.
Wall and tile rubble. Isn't that something non-sentient?
It is.
And yet it can expound the Dharma?
It's constantly expounding it, radiantly expounding it without ceasing.
Then why haven't I heard it?
You yourself haven't heard it, but that doesn't say that others can't hear it, have heard it.
Well, what sort of person acquires such hearing?
All the sages have such hearing.
Can you hear it, Hoshan?
No, I can't.
Well, if you haven't heard it, how do you know that non-sentient beings expound the Dharma?
Fortunately, I haven't heard it, because if I had, you wouldn't. I would be the same as the sages, and you therefore would not hear the Dharma that I teach.
In that case, ordinary people would have no access to it.
I teach for ordinary people.
Well, what happens to ordinary people after they hear you?
Then they're no longer ordinary people.
In which sutra is it taught that non-sentient beings expound the Dharma?
You should not suggest that it hasn't been taught in the sutras. You're a monk. Haven't you seen it in the Avatamsaka Sutra? It says, the earth expounds the Dharma, living beings expound it throughout the 3 times, everything expounds it. The monk stays silent. Nothing happens after that.
And yet, according to Yun Ye, even the Avatamsaka Sutra says, water birds, tree groves, all without exception, recite the Buddha's name, recite the Dharma. And that's what I experienced firsthand on Friday.
Yeah, the trees and Dogen says, mountains and rivers are preaching the Dharma constantly. So what is this? Is this animism? We're being taken over by talking trees and rocks. And there's even another one when Dogen and his monk friend are walking past a stone memorial for some deceased person unknown. And Dongshan says, someone in there is preaching the Dharma, ceaselessly preaching the Dharma constantly. And I can't remember what the student's response was, but eventually shut up and walked along. In any case, last week there was a conference that just happened to happen on campus on animism. and Greek religion and Buddhist religion. So the speakers were all talking about the use of animism in these traditions, Greece particularly. And well, I can't summarize the conference, but it came up first. Bob hears the trees and the rocks. I hear an academic talk on animism in the same week. So there's synchronicity in any case. So, Diamond Sutra, 4 lines that are important, not the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, that echo what Dongshan was illustrating in his reaction with other monks. Shiki, recite it for me. Shiki fumi, ku fumi, shiki zokuzen, shiki. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not different from form. Form is not different from emptiness. Form is the conventional world, the constructed world, the world that's dependent, constantly dependent on other things. It's dependent on its opposite. It's constituted by speech. And emptiness is without speech and ineffable. So when Dongshan says about Yun Yan, first, talking about his master who had said, "This is it." So the student asked, did he really know reality? And the master says, if he didn't know reality, how would he have known how to speak? So that's form. He speaks and he knows reality. But what's reality? What's the Dharma? Dharma is essentially everything is conditioned. Even what the Buddha teaches is conditioned, as long as it's in words. So the truth of emptiness is everything is conditioned. Not enlightened. That's the enlightened insight. But that's also the map. That's not the territory. You have to do it to get there. So the response by the second part is, and if he did know it, why did he talk? Why did he open his mouth? And that's something that linguists call I get the first one. I was going to say biolingua. Hyperbiolingua. You know what that is?
Well, I can decipher the phrases.
All people who study psychology know this. I didn't know this. Anyway, this is what it describes: a state in which one person's personality shifts completely to another personality instantly. It's not he doesn't go into 2 lives, but his speech is coming from one person, and then suddenly it comes from another person. And that's Zen. It's holding 2 personalities together at the same time that are contradictory. So that's again a map that's not the territory. You have to go there, get it, but that's the kind of external example of that. So it leads into speaking without speaking. Another story. When I was in China for the first time in the early 70s, This was right after the end of the Cultural Revolution. I was traveling in Sichuan with friends. And we went to the grounds of an old Buddhist temple that what had been one of the major Buddhist temples in Chengdu, in Sichuan. And most of the buildings had been destroyed and it had been turned into a public park. But they left the altar section in the center section of the main Buddha hall in the middle of the park, and it was still there. But the walls were gone. There was nothing around it. It had a roof and two side walls, and it was open to the south, to the front. And as we got closer, I noticed a lot of people up there moving around the space. Actually, it would be like a U in the space, the back of where the Buddha image would normally be, and then on both sides, it would be the Arhats or the Bodhisattvas or someone else lined up. But no statues were there. They'd all been destroyed or taken away. But there were 2 or 3 older women, clearly the grandmothers of some grandchildren that they had with them. And as we came close enough that I could see what they were doing, the grandmothers were taking the children, and they looked like they were probably 3 or 4, maybe 5, and taking them to a blank wall on the side where you are, about a position like that, turning them towards the wall, and there was a little outline of a figure on the wall. And that was all. It was done with a burnt stick because it was left over from the revolution. Putting their hands together, pushing them down, bowing. There was nothing there. Their image. And then they would take them to the next one, and they would do it in clock direction. So these are 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds learning ritual right from the beginning until it becomes innate. And then that played off other stories I saw when what were people coming in from the countryside, obviously farmers or living way away from the elite centers of Chinese culture. This was back in the 70s. And they hadn't had an opportunity to go to temples before, so they were taking the opportunity, but they didn't know what they were like Yoko. These are important places. We don't know what's going on here, but they're important for some reason. And I would see them getting in the line of people going around in front of this Buddhist statues, and particularly the main Buddhist statue, looking at the person next to them to see what to do and then doing it. Nobody's talking, and they're going around bowing to these images. When we come here, well, never when I come here, somebody gets here before me and they get the tables and the chairs all around. By the time I get here, Buddha images behind me. Everything else is there. Everything's pulled aside. Come to the door, take your shoes off, bow. When I first started doing Zazen, I said, oh, I guess that's what you do. I'll just do that. So I did that. Come in. Oh, look, there's a way to bow to your cushion. There's a way to arrange yourself in relationship to the Buddhist image at the front. And if you're in China or Japan, not only are you have the Buddha, you have lots of images all around the space. Now you don't bow to all of them, but it's a place filled with images and movements, bodily actions. No one's talking when you come in. So there's a wealth of signs telling you, leading you around this space, the sacred space. What's making the space sacred? We are. It's a different world. the rules change, the language changes inside that space. But original manifestation, we already know what to do in a different space. Just by watching other people, we learn to do what to do. And this is hyperglycemia. When children, infants, before they've learned much language, according to the psychological theory, they identify when they reach for something, their hand reaching and what they're reaching for is the same. They don't distinguish between them. The sign, the symbol, the word, and the object are undivided. The first thing they learn to do when they begin to enter the family society, the culture of the society, is they learn to take the name off the object and use a word that applies to that object. And the best example of that is a stick that turns into a doll for a little girl or boy, and a big long stick that turns into a horse for a boy. The word is taken off the content and reapplied to something else. And that's, according to Robert Sharp, a theory of ritual. As people mature, they develop the same skill of taking a conventional, everyday situation and going into a church. Were you talking about the church?
I was.
Going into a church and feeling something different there. The atmosphere has changed and the rules have changed, and what's real has changed and what's not real has changed. The images on the altar. And this is what Buddhists call darshan. To look at an icon is to be seen by the icon. It comes alive. Trees come alive.
So Master, we're not Japanese and we don't live in a Japanese temple. We're not in a monastery. So why do we come in America and chant in Japanese when we don't even know the words we're saying?
Because it creates a different atmosphere. Remember, when we were talking about mantras and dharanis, they're intentionally undecipherable. It's a mood enhancer.
I did notice when we chant the Heart Sutra in Japanese, it flows better rhythmically than when we do it in English every other time.
You know, even in Japanese monasteries, to be in Japan and hear them chanting, they're singing. They're not singing like a church choir, but the voices are moving in a different pattern so that it's becoming musical. Music doesn't represent anything but itself. Music is music. It can't be translated into another medium. Music score is not the music. You have to have the music, and that's all it is. Same time.
So when I'm playing flute as people are coming in, this is a Dharma gate. We're entering into a sacred space.
Absolutely.
I always thought I was just playing some music.
Well, you were. And if you didn't know that was music, why did you bother to tell me it was? We could keep going with this. So what I'm suggesting here is that the rules don't change. It's not a question of belief. We don't, the little boy on the stick that he thinks is a horse, if you stop him and tell him it's a stick, he says, "Don't bother me." It is for me now, this world that I'm in it's created around this stick. You can't use any kind of object. Somebody was talking in the same subject about the wafer and Catholic Eucharist. What if you actually put a piece of meat there instead of a wafer? It wouldn't work. So there's a movement of meaning to something that is not at all the flesh of Christ. So you don't need something that looks like it. You can transfer it to something else. So that's the world of everyday existence. That's what language is about. That's what society is about. We do that all the time. And what we've done is we've, in building and putting together this space, is created a different space temporarily that will all be packed up in the end and go back to the hospice meeting room. Everything is transient. Everything is dependent on the people that are there, the minds that are active, interacting with it. This is emptiness. That's what emptiness means, not nothing, but impermanence. So there, and in fact, say one more thing about that. One is it getting any? Nothing is attained by chanting the Heart Sutra or by doing meditation, because you already have it, original Buddhahood. What the role of the teacher, the master is to be the occasion for the emergence of that, not the cause of it. So that's what ritual does. It enhances that. Now we don't have much time left, right?
Master, I've never heard it say so succinctly. After 50 years of study, I've never heard it put so clearly.
Moo. Or moo. Actually, I saw that happen once when I was with my professor in Korea. We were living at a monastery where we were working with manuscripts and the collection in the museum. This was when I was a graduate student. And so Kusan, who was the master at that particular temple, and my professor, who was sitting kind of like Bob here, got into this little repartee where they were doing exactly what Bob was doing just now. And good old Lancaster, Professor Lancaster, held out for a while and finally had to surrender. Couldn't keep up with the game. But it's that ability to transfer meaning to something that isn't what you expect it to be. So there is something magical. It's not magical. It's human nature that happens in a space like this. I'm trying to think where to go.
Bill, I think we could stay till 10 past today if everybody's okay. It sounds like you have some loose ends you'd like to draw together on this. And I have a question, if I could.
Yeah, let me get some questions, yeah.
I was noticing today as we were chanting a Dharani we weren't that familiar with in honor of Koan, that we got a little out of step with each other. We had a kind of a step there and a step over here. And I was,
Well, that was on purpose.
well, that's kind of the basis of my question.
We're not perfect.
Is that when we chant and we bring our voices into harmony, we're listening to each other. We're trying to be on the same syllable in the same sort of sequence. Does that add to the sort of sense of the creation of this space, of this reality that we're experiencing together?
Yeah, good point. Exactly. That's why a lot of studies of ritual, particularly in Japan, compare it to music. It's a skill. And the master, Koan Sensei, and so on, over years of practice at LA's Zen Center and so on, developed skill as a musician, but not as a musician, but the equivalent of a musician. And with someone who's trained like that, the idea is it brings the rest of the group into sync with that person and with each other eventually. And so there are good performances and there are mediocre performances, but that's recognized. When I was in China, I remember I was reading the ritual order of things that was happening in front of me. I knew the abbot of that particular monastery, so I was sitting up in front, and he gave me a book like this and said, "This is what we're doing," only it was in Chinese. And I saw it got to a particular point, and it said, the master circumambulates the altar 3 times. And each time he comes to the front, he puts a piece of burning incense. And then the incenser then goes around again. So I was watching, I saw that in the instructions. I was watching him. And I noticed that he went around 4 times. So I would have dinner with him every night while I was staying at the monastery, and 2 or 3 other guests. And I said, "By the way, I noticed that you did something that wasn't in the book. What happened?" He said, "Oh, I dropped a match, so I had to go around again."
And that was my job as the chanter, to keep everybody together.
Uh-huh.
Well, I failed, but I was smart enough to know that Elisa was leading, at which time she became the chanter and I followed her, and we all got back on
Yeah,
track.
there was that moment. That was really cool.
Yeah, I chant that several times a day, when I'm at Rinzai.
That's the first time I ever chanted it.
What was it? What were you chanting?
The Daishin Durant, what we did, oh, yeah,
What
we
you did.
did that for Koan.
Oh.
We did a different Durrani today.
And we weren't familiar. Yeah, we hadn't practiced it in sync together. Yeah.
I didn't even know the word. I mean, I'm trying to read the words and do the fish drum, and finally I just tripped over myself. It was great.
It was great.
I just wanted to riff off of an earlier thread when Bob, you were talking about the trees communicating, and then you were mentioning, Bill, about the conference at UCSB last week on animism in Greek history. I'm here at UCSB for a physics conference, and on Friday, we had a discussion on animate materials and their definition. It's a very recent phenomenon in physics, and how to describe a material that mimics life in a way, but is not alive.
Well, this is physics and spirit coming together in America today. So here we are,
And on Friday in particular.
all on
so-
Friday morning, yes.
Yeah.
There's also a lichen that is both, it looks like a dead piece of rock when there's no water there for maybe weeks or months or better part of a year. But it has no other function than hanging onto the rock. It looks like it's a part of the rock almost. And then if it gets a little water, it suddenly becomes animate. And people had mistaken it for a dead something on the rock, a mark on the rock. And this is one of the, I don't know what the biological description of this phenomenon is, but it's almost dead. It's dead, but it's alive. Yeah. And that was the answer actually that Dongshan had to his student when they passed the memorial stone. He said, "Living well dead."
Hmm.
Yeah, I just had a comment because you really struck me when you talked about the child that is learning, well, before they learn a language and they're they're not, they don't divide items, right? And then you talked about the stick, and then when they start to separate the words, and this is a horse, even though it's a stick. I have a 3-year-old, and it has been fascinating to see that happen in real time, also with nothing. I don't know what that is, but in other words, we will play with absolutely nothing, thin air, imagination. Here's the cup, here's the spoon, here's the bowl, absolutely nothing, and he is as engaged as if it were the real thing, almost like Peter Pan and their magical smorgasbord of food that is all imaginary.
How old is he?
He's 3 and 3 months.
Yeah, that's the age.
Right in the,
that-
yeah, so I don't know what that is, but it's something very, it's gotta be part and parcel with what you're talking about.
This, Lev Yavosky. Yavosky, who's the psychologist
Mhm.
who's talking about this. Says this is the transition point, a major transition point in development. Is figuring out what's or intuitively grasping eventually the difference between the content and the sign that identifies the content.
Mm.
And then they can begin to interact with people. But one of the things that this says to me, and this didn't come out in anything I heard, it's just my reaction to this discussion, is what is it we're doing in a ritual like this, the time we're doing it? When we're putting the sign back into where it's no more than what it's its content. The sign and the content come together. And that's, I think, what most of these exchanges do. They put both possibilities. This is reality, this is not reality, but they both are the same. Reality is manifest in conditioned speech. It's equivalent to conditioned speech. This is getting messier and messier, so I better stay on track. I'm gonna look at one last thing, which is the jewel mirror samadhi. And that's on page 12, I think, or 14. If you have a book. I should have just looked, oh, here we are.
One last thing he says, as an academic, so 3 hours later, one last thing. 6 hours later, oh, one last thing.
That happened in the conference I was at. So give me one more minute. Went on for another 10 minutes. And somebody said, okay, we've got to go, but we're running out of time. Okay, I'll finish in just another minute. Hang on. The person in charge of the meeting was getting really frustrated. So if you get frustrated, just let me know. There are 3 or 4 things I want to draw your attention to. This is samadhi is written in a very archaic form of classical Chinese. So it has an antiquity feeling when you're reciting it. But when we do it in English, that antiquity is gone. We're not getting that kind of illocutionary sense of what's going on there. And it's a string of metaphors and analogies for exactly what we've been talking about with the sign and the content. And so it starts the Dharma of thusness, and then everything is a discussion of the Dharma of thusness. By the way, this isn't a general Buddhist recitation. It's unique to the Soto sect. So it embodies what Bob and I were talking about, trees and rivers manifesting the Dharma. That's taking the same issue and running it through 10, 15, 20 different iterations. It's the same thing over and over again, in different iterations. Thusness is the nature of the Dharma. Dharma with a capital D. The ineffable truth. So, a few quotations from there. The meaning is not in the words, yet it accommodates the inquiring impulse. So words are being used, the meaning is not in the words, but it accommodates the inquiring impulse. So it's an occasion to draw out of somebody an insight that's already there. And my favorite one, or the most important one for me, I'll come back to that. I'm gonna jump down. Although it's not fabricated, it's not without speech. Dharma is not fabricated, that's the ineffable, but it's not without speech. That's the contradiction. It's ineffable, it can't be spoken. So what's going on there? It's like the babe like a babe in the world. Babe, we already went through that, that bothers me. It's like the ruddy infant. 5 aspects complete. 5 aspects are standing, sitting, arising, disappearing, and so on. Does not, oh, there it is. It does not come, does not go, it does not arise, it does not abide. So Baba is it doesn't come, it doesn't go. Wawa is the rest of it. In Chinese, it's pupo, ha ha. Baba, wawa. Speaking without words. Ultimately, it does not apprehend anything. Final one. This is the final one.
So you say,
When the wooden man stands up to sing and the stone woman gets up to dance, it's not within the reach of feeling or discrimination. How could it admit of consideration or thought? Animism. And my favorite one. So that wasn't the last one.
I knew it.
This is really the ultimate touch. Go back to very close to the beginning. Turning away and touching are both wrong. It's like a massive flame. And this was an idea that was taken out of the Dodger Duolun, which was a commentary on the Prajnaparamita. And in the Dodger Duolun, it says, perfect wisdom, which is the equivalent of thusness in what we read, is like a giant ball of flame. It can't be grasped from any side. But to touch it, you'll burn yourself. To turn away from it, you'll live in ignorance. So you keep both of them. You neither touch nor you let go of. You maintain a great doubt. That's a Chan term, Buddhist term. Every time even what the Buddha said is conventional, it's conditional, it's dependent. So you hold both in place lightly at the same time. That's not Dongshan, that's my commentary on that line. So I read it. No, I'm done. Does anyone want to throw any other clothes in the washing machine?
Well, let's give thanks to Professor Powell for
Thank you, Bill.
enlightening us and confusing us at the same time.
Hold that lightly in mind.
And we will end with a ritual that we always do, the 4 vows, with keeping in mind that the James Dean Memorial is ritual space.
Page 41,
Page
if you,
41.
if you're not sure where the.
We'll do it 3 times in English, Japanese, and English. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to attain. Kyujo Mugen Seigando. Bono Ujin Seiganda. So Muryo Seigangatu. Butsudo Muryo Seigando. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to attain.
Okay, we are a little over time here, so we'll go quick with the announcements. We'll be meeting again the second Sunday of November. Check the website or look if you're on the
In
email
2
list.
weeks.
In 2 weeks, that's
Okay.
right. And Michael will be temple manager that day, and if anybody can show up a little bit early to help him with setup, that would really be appreciated. So Michael, thank you for doing that.
Of course.
We exist and are able to have our Zen Center because of the generosity of our Sangha. So if you want to make a gift, there's a basket over there to do so, or you can do so online or through PayPal. Lots of ways of doing it. So just go to our website, look at the Dana or giving instructions, and that'll lead you. And any other announcements this morning, and I'll just start with gratitude to all of you for helping us celebrate and honor Koan's life. That was a really, really nice way to start. So Elisa, thank you for your help in putting that together, and Bob for really adjusting to allow that to happen this morning.
I could just say there's a board meeting. Anyone wants to tune in, it's on November 2nd at 1 o'clock. It's been moved, and that's, I believe that's the date. It's certainly on the website and in the emails.
Okay.
If anybody wants to tune in. Yeah.
Rebecca, anything to add by way of announcements? All right, thank you.